On October 19, 1987, flames tore through a stately Victorian home on East Gaston Street in Savannah's historic district. By the time firefighters contained the blaze at 3:47 in the morning, 2 people were dead. Daniel Marlowe, 34, a securities broker at Coastal Investment Group, was found collapsed near the front entrance, overcome by smoke. His wife, Lydia Marlowe, 31, heir to a textile fortune, died in the hallway outside the nursery where their 8-month-old son Noah slept. The baby's room bore the worst of the fire's destruction. Investigators sifted through the charred remains for days, finding nothing they could definitively identify as the infant's body. The heat had been so intense that the hardwood flooring buckled and portions of the ceiling collapsed into the space. They concluded that Noah Marlowe had perished in the inferno, his small body consumed entirely by temperatures that exceeded 1,800 degrees. 3 weeks after the funeral, Lydia's estate attorney gathered the remaining family in his office on Bull Street. There were few people present: Lydia's elderly uncle from Charleston, Daniel's estranged brother from Atlanta, and Monique Harris, the 27-year-old nanny who had cared for Noah since he was 5 weeks old. When the attorney read the will, dated just 6 months before the fire, the room fell silent. If anything happened to both parents and Noah died as well, the entire remaining trust fund would go to Monique Harris. The amount was $1.2 million. Monique sat quietly, tears streaming down her face, her hands folded in her lap. She told the family she had no idea Lydia had done this. She said she would donate much of it to charity in Noah's name. Everyone in that room believed her. For 13 years, the Marlowe fire remained a tragic accident. A faulty space heater in the nursery. A family destroyed in a single terrible night. The insurance companies paid out. The estate was settled. The charred lot on East Gaston Street was sold to developers, and Monique Harris disappeared into a comfortable, quiet life in Charleston, where nobody knew about the fire or the inheritance, or the smiling woman who once held a baby boy while his mother watched with grateful eyes. But in the spring of 2000, construction workers began renovating what would become luxury condominiums on that same lot. On April 7th, a crew foreman named Robert Chen was supervising the demolition of the original foundation when his team uncovered something beneath the former nursery. Under 18 inches of new concrete poured by previous developers, beneath the original burned floorboards, they found a metal storage trunk. Inside were bundles of scorched $20 and $50 bills, bound with rubber bands that had melted into the paper. And wrapped in what forensic analysts would later identify as a baby blanket with embroidered sailboats, they found a small skull and the delicate bones of an infant. The Savannah Police Department reopened the Marlowe case that same day. What they would discover over the next 8 months would reveal that the woman who inherited a fortune had orchestrated one of the most calculating murders in Georgia's history. And the truth had been hidden, quite literally, beneath everyone's feet for 13 years. Before we dive deeper into this incredible story, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Monique Elaine Harris grew up in North Charleston, the second of 4 children born to a postal worker and an elementary school teacher. By all accounts, her childhood was unremarkable. She graduated from Burke High School in 1978 with decent grades and spent 2 years at Trident Technical College studying early childhood education before dropping out to work full-time. Throughout her early 20s, Monique moved through a series of childcare positions. She worked at a daycare center in Mount Pleasant. She nannied for a family in Somerville for 8 months. References described her as reliable, warm with children, and professional. But those who knew her well noticed something else. Monique spent money she didn't have. By 1985, at 25 years old, She carried nearly $30,000 in credit card debt. She leased a BMW she couldn't afford. She wore designer clothes purchased at boutiques in downtown Charleston. She took weekend trips to Atlanta and stayed in hotels that cost more per night than she earned in a week. Friends later told investigators that Monique seemed obsessed with appearing successful, with projecting an image of wealth that her salary as a nanny could never support. In January 1986, she answered an advertisement placed by Daniel and Lydia Marlowe in the Charleston Post and Courier. The Marlowes, who were expecting their first child, needed a live-in nanny for their Savannah home. The position offered room, board, and a salary of $28,000 annually, which was generous for the time. Monique interviewed with Lydia on a cold afternoon at a coffee shop on Broughton Street. Lydia was 6 months pregnant, visibly anxious, and according to the coffee shop owner who remembered the meeting, clearly desperate for help. She hired Monique on the spot. Monique moved into the third-floor bedroom of the Marlowe home on East Gaston Street. 2 weeks later, Noah Marlowe was born on February 14, 1987, at Candler Hospital. From the beginning, Monique became his primary caregiver. Lydia, suffering from severe postpartum depression, spent much of those early months in bed. Daniel, meanwhile, was rarely home. He left for his brokerage firm before 7 each morning, and frequently didn't return until after 9 at night. Monique did everything. She handled the night feedings. She changed diapers, gave baths, took Noah for walks through Forsyth Park in the afternoons. Neighbors on East Gaston Street grew accustomed to seeing her on the front porch, holding the baby while he napped, reading paperback novels while keeping one hand on his chest. Helen Pritchard, who lived 3 doors down, later told police that Monique seemed more like Noah's mother than Lydia did. She recalled seeing Monique outside every single day, always smiling, always attentive to the baby. She also remembered thinking how exhausted Lydia looked on the rare occasions she appeared in public. What the neighbors didn't know was that the Marlowe marriage was disintegrating. Daniel had been systematically stealing from Lydia's trust fund, moving money into offshore accounts she didn't know existed. He had lost nearly $400,000 in bad investments and was desperately trying to conceal the losses. Lydia had recently discovered some of the missing funds and had secretly consulted with a divorce attorney in Charleston. In June 1987, Lydia made a decision that would seal her fate. She contacted her estate attorney, Gerald Hoffman, and updated her will. The previous version had left everything to Daniel if she died, with provisions for Noah to inherit when he came of age. The new will was radically different. If Lydia died while Noah was still a minor, Monique Harris would become his legal guardian. If anything happened to both Lydia and Noah, Monique would inherit the remainder of the trust fund outright. Lydia's reasoning, documented in notes she left with her attorney, was simple. She didn't trust Daniel with Noah's care or her money. She believed Monique was the only person who truly cared about her son. What Lydia didn't realize was that Monique was drowning financially. By September 1987, collection agencies were calling the Marlowe house 3 times a week. Monique's car was 2 months away from repossession. She had maxed out 6 credit cards and had taken out a high-interest personal loan to make minimum payments. Her debt had climbed to $42,000. Gerald Hoffman later testified that Lydia never told Monique about the will change. It was meant to be kept private, revealed only if something happened. But investigators would later discover that Monique had been present at the house on the afternoon of June 19th when Hoffman visited with the documents. She had been upstairs in the nursery, and the door had been open. October 19th began like any other Monday. Daniel left for work at 6:45. Lydia spent most of the day in her bedroom, emerging only for lunch. Monique took Noah to the pediatrician for his 8-month checkup, then stopped at Kroger on Abercorn Street for groceries. Security footage from the store, which police reviewed later, showed Monique in line at 2:37 in the afternoon. Noah contentedly sitting in the shopping cart, reaching for her face while she smiled at him. That evening, Monique prepared dinner for the family: chicken breast with rice and steamed vegetables. Lydia ate in her room. Daniel called at 7:15 to say he'd be late at the office. Monique fed Noah pureed carrots and sweet potato, gave him a bath, read him 2 picture books, and put him down at 8 o'clock. At 8:45, Monique left through the front door. She told Lydia she was meeting her sister Angela for coffee at a shop on Liberty Street. She took her car and drove to the cafe where Angela was waiting. What happened next, investigators would later piece together from witness statements, security footage, and forensic evidence, painted a chilling picture of premeditation. Monique stayed at the coffee shop with Angela for exactly 47 minutes. Multiple witnesses remembered seeing them. The owner recalled that they sat near the window and that Monique seemed relaxed, even cheerful. At 9:32, Monique hugged her sister goodbye in the parking lot and drove away. But she didn't go home. Cell tower records, which were primitive in 1987 but still existed, and later testimony from a gas station attendant placed Monique's car in the parking lot of a Texaco station on Victory Drive. She sat there for 28 minutes. At 10:17, she drove back to East Gaston Street. She parked 2 blocks away on a side street where Spanish moss hung thick from the oak trees, and the streetlights cast long shadows. She walked to the Marlowe house through the back alley. Monique had her own key. She had copied it months earlier, telling the locksmith it was for her parents' house. She used that key now, entering through the back door that led into the kitchen. The house was dark, except for the lamp in Lydia's bedroom. Monique moved quietly through the downstairs. She went to Daniel's office, a cramped room off the main hallway where he kept financial records and paperwork. She opened the locked bottom drawer of his desk using a key she'd found weeks earlier while cleaning. Inside were bundles of cash, nearly $15,000 that Daniel had been skimming from client accounts. Monique took the money. Then she climbed the stairs to the second floor. She paused outside Lydia's room. The door was closed. She could hear the faint sound of the television. Lydia was awake, but she wouldn't come out. She rarely did after 8 o'clock. Monique continued up the narrower staircase to the 3rd floor, where the nursery and her own bedroom were located. Noah was asleep in his crib, lying on his back, his small chest rising and falling in the dim glow of the nightlight. Later, forensic psychologists would struggle to explain what happened in those next moments. Monique was not impulsive. She was not violent by nature, but she was desperate, and she had spent months considering this moment. She had loosened one of the wooden rails on Noah's crib 3 days earlier, during her regular cleaning routine. It was a subtle thing. A few screws removed, leaving the rail barely attached. Now, she removed it completely. Noah never woke up. Monique had cared for him since he was 5 weeks old. She knew his routines, his sleep patterns, his temperament. She knew he wouldn't cry when he saw her face. The medical examiner's report, compiled 13 years later, indicated that Noah died from blunt force trauma to the head. The skull fracture was consistent with impact from a wooden object. Likely the crib rail death would have occurred within minutes. Monique wrapped his small body in his favorite blanket, the one with sailboats that Lydia's mother had sent from Charleston. She carried him down to the 2nd floor and into a storage closet at the end of the hall. There, hidden behind boxes of Christmas decorations, was a metal trunk that had belonged to Daniel's father. Monique had discovered it months ago and had moved it, with difficulty, to a space she'd created under the nursery floorboards during a weekend when the family was away. She placed Noah inside the trunk along with the bundles of cash from Daniel's office. The cash served 2 purposes. It explained why someone might have broken in, and it looked like robbery. Then Monique returned to the nursery. She scattered toys across the floor. She left the window slightly open. She made it look like someone had climbed in from outside. At 11:43, she went back downstairs. In the kitchen, she found the can of lighter fluid Daniel used for the grill. She poured it down the second-floor hallway, starting near the nursery door and trailing it toward the stairs. She poured more in the nursery itself, soaking the carpet near the crib. She struck a match from the box above the stove. She lit the fluid trail near the nursery and stepped back as the flames raced along the hallway floor. The fire spread faster than she expected. By the time she reached the bottom of the stairs, smoke was already filling the second-floor landing. She moved quickly to the front door, unlocked it from the inside, and slipped out into the night. She walked the 2 blocks back to her car and drove to her sister's apartment in the South Side neighborhood. Angela later told investigators that Monique arrived shortly after midnight, crying hysterically, saying she'd just heard on a police scanner app that there was a fire on East Gaston Street. Firefighters arrived at the Marlowe house at 11:51. Neighbors had called 911 after seeing flames in the upstairs windows. By the time crews entered the building, the second and third floors were fully engulfed. They found Daniel collapsed in the foyer. He had apparently come home sometime between 11:30 and 11:45, unlocked the front door, and been overcome by smoke before he could reach the stairs. Paramedics worked on him for 18 minutes, but he was pronounced dead at the scene. Lydia's body was discovered in the second-floor hallway, 15 feet from the nursery door. The medical examiner determined she had died from smoke inhalation while trying to reach her son. The nursery was a total loss. The crib was burned to its metal frame. The walls were blackened. The floor had collapsed in several places. Fire investigators spent 6 hours combing through debris, searching for any sign of Noah's remains. They found nothing. No bones, no teeth, no identifiable human tissue. The lead investigator, Captain Raymond Mitchell, told reporters that the extreme heat in that room had likely cremated the infant's body completely. The official cause of the fire was listed as accidental. Investigators theorized that a space heater in the nursery had malfunctioned, igniting nearby curtains. There was evidence of accelerant use, but Mitchell attributed that to cleaning products stored in the hallway closet. Nobody suspected Arson Monique played her role perfectly. She attended the funeral service at Bonaventure Cemetery, where Lydia and Noah were buried in adjacent plots. She wept openly at the graveside. She gave a short speech about how much Lydia had meant to her, and how she would never forget Noah's smile. 3 weeks later, when Gerald Hoffman read the will, Monique's shock seemed genuine. She kept saying she didn't deserve it. She offered to split the money with Lydia's uncle. She suggested setting up a scholarship fund in Noah's name, but she accepted the inheritance. $1.2 million transferred into her account in November 1987. Within 6 months, Monique had paid off every cent of her debt. She purchased a small but elegant townhouse in Charleston's Harleston Village neighborhood for cash. She bought a new car, a modest Honda Accord. She quit working as a nanny and enrolled part-time at the College of Charleston, studying art history. To everyone who knew her, Monique seemed to be living modestly on a reasonable inheritance from a family she'd worked for. Nobody questioned where the money had come from. Nobody thought to ask why a nanny would inherit over $1 million. For 13 years, Monique Harris lived a comfortable, quiet existence. She finished her degree. She worked part-time at a gallery on King Street. She dated occasionally, but never married. She traveled to Europe twice, taking modest trips to museums in Paris and Florence. She never mentioned the Marlowes. When new acquaintances asked about her past, she said she'd worked in childcare, but had gotten a small inheritance that allowed her to change careers. She was vague about the details. Most people didn't press. She became active in her church. St. Michael's Episcopal on Meeting Street. She volunteered at a soup kitchen every Thursday evening. She donated $5,000 annually to the Charleston Area Therapeutic Writing Center, which provided writing lessons for disabled children. On the surface, Monique Harris appeared to be exactly what she claimed, a woman who had received unexpected money and used it responsibly to build a meaningful life. But beneath that careful exterior, the weight of what she'd done never left her. Friends from this period later told investigators that Monique suffered from insomnia. She took prescription sleeping pills. She saw a therapist weekly for anxiety, though she never told the therapist the real source of her problems. A former boyfriend, Martin Tressel, remembered that Monique refused to have children. She wouldn't even discuss it. When he pushed the subject in 1994, she ended the relationship abruptly. Another friend, Patricia Coleman, recalled a disturbing moment in 1996. They were watching the evening news, and a story came on about a house fire in North Charleston where 2 children had died. Monique stood up, walked to the bathroom, and vomited. When Patricia asked if she was okay, Monique said she had the flu. But Patricia remembered that Monique was shaking. These were small cracks in an otherwise flawless performance. For nearly 13 years, Monique managed to maintain the lie. She never returned to Savannah. She never spoke about the fire. She never allowed herself to be photographed holding children. The Marlowe case remained closed. The lot on East Gaston Street sat empty for 3 years before being sold to a development company in 1990. They poured a concrete slab over the burned foundation and planned to build townhouses, but financing fell through. The property changed hands twice more over the next decade. In 1999, an Atlanta-based real estate development firm called Peachtree Properties purchased the lot with plans to build luxury condominiums. Construction began in March 2000. Robert Chen, the construction foreman, had been in the business for 17 years. He'd overseen dozens of renovation projects across the Southeast. On the morning of April 7, 2000, his crew was using a jackhammer to break up the concrete slab that covered the old foundation. At 10:15, one of his workers, James Pike, called him over to the area that had been the nursery. The jackhammer had revealed something underneath the concrete. It looked like rotted wood. Chen climbed down into the excavated space with a flashlight. He could see the edges of what appeared to be a trunk or storage box. It was wedged into a cavity between the original floor joists, hidden beneath layers of fire debris and the concrete that had been poured over it a decade earlier. He instructed his crew to carefully remove the surrounding material. It took 3 hours to fully expose the trunk. It was metal, badly corroded, approximately 3 feet long and 2 feet wide. The lock had rusted through. Chen called his site supervisor before opening it. Something about the situation felt wrong. When they finally pried the lid open, using crowbars and bolt cutters, they found the bundles of cash first. They were charred and stuck together, barely recognizable as money. Beneath the cash, wrapped in a rotted piece of fabric, were the bones. Chen stepped back immediately. He told his crew not to touch anything. He called the Savannah Police Department at 1:37 in the afternoon. Detective Lisa Kowalski arrived at the scene 40 minutes later with 2 crime scene technicians. She was a 15-year veteran of the department, assigned to the cold case division. She immediately recognized the address from the old files. The bones were carefully photographed, documented, and removed by the medical examiner's office. The trunk and its contents were transported to the forensics lab on Habersham Street. Initial examination confirmed what everyone at the scene already suspected. The bones belonged to an infant, approximately 6 to 9 months old. The skull showed evidence of a depressed fracture consistent with blunt force trauma. The fabric was identified as cotton with synthetic fibers, likely a baby blanket. The bundles of cash totaled just over $14,000. Despite the fire damage and years of degradation, forensic accountants were able to partially reconstruct some of the bills. Serial numbers on several of the larger bills were still legible. Within 3 days, investigators had made several critical connections. First, the currency was dated between 1982 and 1987, consistent with the time period of the fire. Second, the serial numbers matched cash that had been reported missing from Daniel Marlowe's brokerage accounts in late 1987. Third, DNA extracted from the bones confirmed with 99.7% certainty that they belonged to Noah Marlowe. The fire that killed Daniel and Lydia. Marlowe had not been an accident. Their son had been murdered before the fire started, his body hidden beneath the nursery floor, and the house had been deliberately set ablaze to cover the crime. Detective Kowalski assembled a task force. They pulled every file related to the original investigation. They interviewed everyone who had known the Marlowes. They examined financial records, phone records, and witness statements from 1987. One name appeared repeatedly: Monique Harris. She had been the last person seen with Noah alive. She had left the house the night of the fire and claimed to be with her sister. She had inherited $1.2 million because of Lydia's will, and she had been the only person besides the family who possessed a key to the house. Investigators pulled Monique's financial records from 1987. She had been deeply in debt before the fire. Within months afterward, every account was paid in full. She had purchased property with cash. She had stopped working despite having no apparent source of income besides the inheritance. On April 23rd, Detective Kowalski drove to Charleston with 2 other investigators. They located Monique at her townhouse on Pitt Street. She was 40 years old now, her hair streaked with gray, wearing a linen dress and reading on her front porch when they arrived. Kowalski identified herself and asked if Monique would be willing to answer questions about the Marlowe case. Monique's face went pale, but she invited them inside. For 2 hours, she answered their questions. She maintained that she had been with her sister the night of the fire. She said she had no idea how Noah's body ended up in a trunk beneath the nursery. She suggested that maybe someone had broken in, killed the baby, and stolen the money from Daniel's office. But when Kowalski showed her the photographs from the excavation site, Monique's composure finally cracked. She stared at the image of the small skull wrapped in the sailboat blanket, and her hands began to shake. She asked for a lawyer. The investigation accelerated. Detectives tracked down Angela Harris, Monique's sister, who was now living in Columbia, South Carolina. Under questioning, Angela admitted that Monique had paid her $3,000 in December 1987 to provide an alibi. She said Monique had threatened to destroy her credit if she didn't cooperate. Angela claimed she had believed it was about a different matter, something to do with Monique's debts, and hadn't understood it was related to the fire until years later. With Angela's testimony collapsing the alibi, investigators obtained a warrant to search Monique's Charleston home. In a locked drawer in her bedroom, they found journals dating back to 1987. The entries were cryptic, but several stood out. June 22, 1987. L changed her will, saw the papers. If something happened to all of them, I would get everything. I can't stop thinking about it. September 8, 1987. Bills are crushing me. I can't sleep. I can't eat. There's only one way out, and I know what it is. October 12, 1987. I've made my decision. God forgive me. On May 19, 2000, the Chatham County District Attorney's Office formally charged Monique Elaine Harris with 3 counts of murder in the first degree and 1 count of arson. The trial began in February 2001 and lasted 6 weeks. The prosecution presented overwhelming evidence. The forensic timeline showed Noah had been killed before the fire started. The presence of Daniel's stolen cash in the trunk indicated premeditation. The discovery of the trunk beneath the nursery floor, in a location only someone intimately familiar with the house could have created, pointed directly to Monique. The journal entries revealed her motive and intent, and Angela's testimony destroyed Monique's alibi. The defense argued that the journals were ambiguous, that Angela's testimony was bought by prosecutors offering her immunity, and that there was no direct physical evidence placing Monique at the house during the fire. But the jury didn't buy it. After 11 hours of deliberation, they returned guilty verdicts on all counts. During the sentencing hearing, Lydia's uncle, Edmund Hartwell, gave a victim impact statement. He spoke about how Lydia had been a kind, troubled woman who had trusted the wrong person. He talked about Noah, a baby who had smiled at the woman who would kill him. He said that Monique had not just taken their lives but had stolen 13 years of justice and peace from everyone who loved them. Monique was given the opportunity to speak. She stood at the defense table, looked at the judge, and said only, "You can't prove I lit the match." It was the closest she came to a confession, and it was enough. Judge Patricia Hendricks sentenced Monique Harris to 3 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. The courtroom erupted in applause. Monique showed no emotion as she was led away. The Savannah Morning News ran a front-page story the next day with the headline, "Nanny Convicted in Marlow, Murders After Bones Found Under Nursery Floor." The article detailed how Monique had maintained her innocence throughout, but had been undone by forensic evidence and her own written words. Of the $1.2 million Monique had inherited, approximately $840,000 remained. It was seized by the state and placed in a trust fund that supported children's advocacy centers across Georgia. The case prompted changes in Georgia's inheritance law. In 2003, the state legislature passed a bill nicknamed Noah's Law, which prohibited anyone convicted of murdering a testator or beneficiary from receiving assets from that person's estate, regardless of whether the will predated the crime. The Marlow house was never rebuilt. The lot remained empty, a small garden planted by local volunteers who wanted to memorialize the family. A bronze plaque was installed in 2002 that read, "In memory of Daniel, Lydia, and Noah Marlow. Gone but never forgotten." Monique Harris is currently incarcerated at Pulaski State Prison in Hawkinsville, Georgia. She has given no interviews and maintains her innocence. Her appeals have all been denied. The woman who once smiled while holding a baby boy, who seemed like family to everyone who knew her, who inherited a fortune built on 3 murders, lives now in a 6-by-9-foot cell, where she will remain for the rest of her life. The truth had been buried for 13 years beneath concrete and ash and lies. But bones don't disappear. Evidence doesn't vanish. And eventually, the ground gives up its secrets.